Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
I think photography is space frozen. It's this undeniable snap, obviously, of the space and things around us, and we can all interpret it differently. But the photograph itself it's that snapshot, it's that frozen moment, it's that congealed element. I don't know. Congealed might not be the right word here, but yeah, it's a frozen moment of many elements.
Fantastic. Okay, so everybody answers the question a little differently. Everybody has a different approach. And so congeals is a funny word to use. It's like the fat on top of the soup, you know?
It is. Yeah, I don't know where that word came from today, but here we are.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Okay, so Tanja, is it Wessels or Wessels?
Wessels. So it's a German surname pronounced as a V.
Sure. So Tanja Wessels, very nice to meet you. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. I love these conversations. I love this moment. And thank you for your patience, because we've been kind of chasing after each other a little bit. Where in the world? You're in Malaysia, yeah?
I am in Malaysia. Not only am I in Malaysia, I'm on an island in Malaysia. So I live in Penang.
Penang. Nice. Mm-hmm. You poor thing. I feel so badly for you. Well, your space looks amazing. Is that like a fake space, or is that your actual living space behind you?
It's a real space. I'm not so good with those backgrounds where people stick their hands into oceans and pull out children and things. It kind of
pull out children and things.
Yeah, I don't know. Like people, even they have these screens, but then obviously it's just a visual screen, because behind them there are entire gymnasiums and families and houses and lives. So, but every single time they break through that, they pull out a barbell or a toddler, or I don't know. So I'm a little bit wary of those things. To answer your question, this is a real space.
Amazing. It looks enormous. It looks great.
It's not Hong Kong.
Yep. Yes. Yes. I don't look. I have no idea who you are, and so I never look at the photos beforehand. So now, give me a second, and I'll just bring up this first photo. I don't even know how we met.
I think it was through Regina's podcast, and then I saw that you had interviewed a friend of mine who's an artist in Hong Kong. So Elizabeth Briel. So
yes,
small world.
Tanja, this is great. Okay, so it's a photo on a beach. It looks like a Hong Kong beach with all the boulders and the garbage, lots of garbage. There's like the plastic. So wait, first of all, hold on. You're walking across the top half in this very sumptuous, beautiful red, not crimson, but tomato red, I guess. Really nice red dress. Around your shoulder is this massive rope attached to these buoys and baskets, and it makes no sense. I mean, it's obviously a kind of a created image, unless this is how you spend your leisure hours. It looks like a campaign image to raise awareness for plastic debris on beaches and beach cleanups. All around you is all of this like washed up garbage, plastic, lots of baskets, I mean, it's a Hong Kong beach at its worst. So you can see a little bit of the grass, a little bit of quasi mangroves, but not quite, a bit of the cliffs. It's a pebble stone beach, and you're okay. So what is this image I'm looking at?
What you just described. So you're absolutely right. It was for a campaign. It's a campaign called the Adventure Cleanup, Hong Kong Adventure Cleanup, and it was started by a couple who lived in Hong Kong, and they are adventurers and mountain climbers and runners, and they just decided one day to go coasteering around Hong Kong Island. Now, coasteering is that very particular activity. You're basically clinging to rocks and walls on the edge of land and water. And they were surprised by how much harder it was in Hong Kong than they thought it would be. They're very experienced adventurers. Consequently, It took them a little bit by surprise. But what ended up happening is they were so inspired by this experience, by what they were finding and seeing, that they decided to create an activity around it where different teams would convene and have this set challenge of cleaning up a certain location and having certain milestones to meet. So this was an exercise where it is a project that hits a number of markers, such as obviously environmental awareness, cleaning up, community building, actual fitness, because the different teams were divided according to their skill sets or their abilities. So for those who are more intrepid, there was an actual rock climbing element to the part of the island that they were allocated. Consequently, there was ropes and boats and things like that. For others who were just looking to enter at it from a more social point of view, you could just go do your beach or something less dangerous. So these competitions were really successful. A lot of different people from different walks of life would join, and the prizes were exciting. Patagonia sponsored the first rounds, and there was an award ceremony, and there were judges. So they really put together a very professional experience around this. So part of the adventure cleanup, I think this was the first or the second, they asked me and my creative partner, Alex Macro, who's the photographer behind this image, to come up with a visual image for this campaign that they could use in their media and to share the message. So Alex and I trundled off to the beach on a Saturday, and I don't know if we were lucky or unlucky, but the tides brought in all kinds of gemstones. So there we were, just mucking about and saying, okay, well, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And of all the images, that one just felt it had that dramatic element to it where you kind of feel like you're looking at something fashion-y, yet it's just all a bunch of rubbish.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely eye-catching. It's definitely dramatic. It doesn't look overly manipulated. Except for the fact that there's this weird figure of you just dragging this massive amount of like plastic garbage behind you. So when were these races held? Because I don't remember seeing them advertised.
So they started maybe in COVID timelines here, but they started maybe in 2017 and ran it every year. And then obviously COVID, and part of the people involved actually left Hong Kong. So then it started becoming a bit more remote, but it still kept going. So as far as I know, maybe Sarge in 2016 might even still be going. So yearly.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. Who are you and why do you do these kinds of things? Like, what?
Existential questions would take me a long time. Who am I? I guess I am so I don't know. What angle are we coming in from? Are we going for
whichever you like? By the way, I have to say something that my questions aren't questions.
Okay.
We're just talking, and then you're like, I think you mean this, and then you just run with it. So
okay. I'm passionate about the environment. I really care about both wildlife, biodiversity, and landscapes. And in 2015, I was living in Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong there was this bit of a 2015 movement around sustainability. A lot of people started coming together, starting up small businesses, or campaigning, or raising awareness, or writing about it. And there was this really nice movement, and it felt exciting. And lots of people learned from each other and banded together. And also during this time, I started one step back, because this gives a little bit of context. I go to Burning Man, and after the first time I went to Burning Man, I came back to Hong Kong and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to have this really big event, community, creativity, but around environmentalism? Mm-hmm. And of course, everybody looked at me and said, yeah, this is Hong Kong.
What are you smoking?
Good luck with that. And I was like, no. I was obviously very high on the post-Burning Man experience. I'm like, no, not literally high. And I was like, no, I can make this happen. I feel very confident that this is something that Hong Kong is missing. Anyway, off I went to I had no formal training in environmentalism or sustainability. I was just very motivated by this concept. So I started joining all these talks, meeting all these people, just blatantly going up to them saying, hey, I have a bonkers idea. What do you think about this? And when you start things like that, people are usually going to give you at least 5 minutes. So I got to get close up to a lot of people who are event organizers or just sustainability people. And it kind of went on from there. But I also started experiencing at the same time I started feeling really on edge and very irritable and very tense and very nervous and just this kind of sadness because I was now so focused on sustainability and everything around me and plastic and waste and food. And so I was just constantly switched on and just absorbing everything around me. And that's not always a pretty picture when you're looking at sustainability, particularly in very dense cities. So I started responding very poorly to things such as all these plastic bags, all this packaging. And I didn't understand at the time how to manage that very well. So it just kind of came out in this emotional, I don't know, either making my poor husband suffer or just responding poorly to situations that really didn't need that kind of response. But it did take me down and I was very confused. I genuinely didn't know what was going on. So I just started Googling random words, plastic, pollution, anxiety. Took me to this whole new world of eco-anxiety. And I was like, wow, hang on, this is actually a thing. And it is a thing.
Yep.
And that propelled me into a space where I entered the sustainability conversation from that kind of more emotional, psychological aspect, as opposed to saying I'm a fashion designer or I work for a multinational or I'm head of sustainability here. It was very kind of like this almost back end entry because most people didn't know what that was. I barely knew what it was, but it led me to getting on stages and speaking at events and just introducing the topic. And that got me some coverage in the media and stuff like that, which was really interesting simply because people weren't referring to me because I was an expert, but because they related to what I was saying. And they were relating to it not in an intellectual academic capacity, rather in an emotional, hang on, I feel really rubbish about the rubbish. So what do I do about it? So that just started becoming a very interesting pathway.
Okay, so this is where the interesting overlaps are. So one of the big things that I had personally in 2009 was, my work had fallen flat. And I thought, okay, well, let me try to do something with my time. So I started Shark Rescue, which was about marine conservation through sharks. I mean, I could have picked coral, but it's not very sexy. Sharks, much more attractive and more impactful. And in Hong Kong, more relevant. And I talked about this in terms of creativity, in terms of creative expression, art, but also conservation requires a certain creative side to us. So do you think that in order to punch through and get to this point where you start something and you're like, okay, well, I want to create a change, that you need to have, like, the first step is to have that frustration, that I don't call it anxiety, but that kind of like that itch or that sort of irritation with the status quo, that you're like, okay, something has to change. I have to do something. I'm going to go learn about something. So how do you, I mean, maybe it doesn't figure at all in your head, but I kind of get the feeling that it did. How did that kind of disquiet impact on what you did?
I think for me personally, given my personality and my angle around things, it resonated quite well because I like to question things, and I do question why we are all so passive around these very poor systems that we support emotionally, psychologically, financially, professionally. And I feel like we're really running off this very outdated model for the world that we're in. So that frustration really propels me because it is this kind of, why can't you see it? Why doesn't this bother you? On the other hand, I don't know that always works for everyone. And I definitely have kind of pivoted a little bit because the more we know, the more we learn, the better we can understand how to communicate. And I think ultimately this is about communication. It's not an echo chamber of kicking and screaming in the corner because woe be me. It's more about how do we actually get engagement. And people respond quite poorly to finger pointing and being told off and shamed.
Sure.
And I think that even the sustainability movement maybe has gone through that pathway where there was this moment where everything was zero waste, #0 waste. How dare you have a plastic cup? And that was
Right.
really strong, and at least in that world that I was living in. And I think we've kind of moved away from that a little bit simply because it's not literally sustainable to keep that momentum up. And it's also really not where the work is, right? There's this
Right.
kind of spectrum of opportunity to really make change. And some of it is people's personal brands and influencers, even within this space. And that's kind of their pitch. But for me, it resonated with me on a very personal level because I do have that slightly rebellious, punkish nature in me. So I kind of like to take that in a maybe a bit more mindful direction rather than just the usual,
Protest.
Yeah. So I think as we evolve, as the dynamics evolve, as the information becomes more available, and as we develop as people, there's no, I think you work with who you are. And I do believe that we are fundamentally, I think we forget who we are, or we are told to not focus on who we essentially are, the things that really resonated with you when you were a child, for example, from the years 0 to 7. Apparently, there's a belief that those were the years where we're really formative and receptive to downloading programming and messages from people around us. And then after that, we're kind of somehow riffing off that, either overdoing it or underdoing or just accounting for it. So I think if we kind of step back to that earlier part in our lives before we were necessarily so influenced by things around us, and we go to things that brought us joy. For me, it was digging around in the garden. I spent a lot of time by myself. I have an older sister, but she's 4 years older and didn't even acknowledge my existence until we were teenagers. So I think that when I look back at my childhood, it was very happy, but it was very particular. And those things that I would gravitate towards, I think I'm doing today as well. Like these photographs, Alex and I just go and muck around somewhere and just start shooting, and we build things out of things and we make things. And
Nice.
but that kind of still, that is who I was as a child. So I guess my point is that who we really are, our authentic selves, is actually a really nice diving board into whatever we're doing today, whatever industry, wherever we are. I think if we can merge those two worlds, it really makes us have a much better experience in this world, I think.
Yes, beautifully said. And I will take that as the segue to go to the next image. Unless you want to say something else about this?
No, not at all. I just to finish off, not everybody's childhoods were magic or nice or even fun or even okay. So this is not discarding trauma or serious physical abuse or mental abuse. That's a very different category. So this isn't one brush paints all the dots. I just wanted to put in a little disclaimer.
Sure. Well said. I will take the disclaimer and move on to the next photo. Aw. Okay, this looks like a photo in okay, so first of all, there's a photo of you in nice shoes. And a very nice white skirt, and then also a sort of maybe it's a white dress with a jacket on top of it. And then next to you, sort of kneeling down, is a handsome fellow with kind of a silvery beard, dressed all in black. It looks like a street in mid-levels in Hong Kong. You're looking at the photo. You're both looking at the photographer with a neutral expression, open. It looks like it's roughly midday, probably sunny with cloudy periods. Not too hot in Hong Kong because nobody's really sweating. Nobody's glowing from the sweat. So, yeah, very nice. Is this Alex who made the photo? And what's going on in this photo?
Yeah, that is Alex. That was my creative partner in Hong Kong. So Alex is from the UK and he went to art school. So we had that kind of London art school thing going on in a city like Hong Kong, which is just very absurd. So we, at one point pre-pandemic, we were going to set up a business whereby we would do portraiture and not makeovers, but portraiture and photography around everything kind of waste and upcycled and recycled and secondhand. So we would give people very professional looking photos, but with a bit more of a story and kind of tapping into that low waste. Because in production, in film and all these things, there's so much waste and props get made and they just get chucked and it's just a system, right? So we wanted to kind of turn that on its head with these very niche offerings of being able to give people images with stories, way more interesting than just, here's my LinkedIn shot. So part of that branding exercise was doing things like that, taking photos of ourselves for the website and the material.
Okay, so the language that you're using is very much within the world that I know, which is in terms of branding, in terms of, so it's kind of funny how the 3-pound goop in your skull and the 3-pound goop in my skull makes sense of the world in a way that is kind of aligned. And you say things like branding and how you kind of overlapped with conservation and sustainability. So how did you get to that? Like,
Yeah.
So going back to when you're 7, were you a big conservationist, or like, what are the roots that resulted in that image?
So as for being I'm South African, Portuguese.
Okay.
So being South African, we're just naturally, it's in our DNA to just...
Wait. You said I'm South African, and you just something like Portuguese?
Yeah. So I was born in Portugal.
Okay. So, but your name is German.
Yeah.
I love it. Like, it's everything. It's okay. Great. Okay.
It's a long story. But
I love it.
So being South African, I think we don't think twice about, yes, of course, animals should be part of our lives. And of course, there's this naturally given symbiosis that we all coexist. Within reason, right? But wildlife, nature, landscapes, being barefoot isn't a crazy idea. It is part of your landscape. So, and then I have a super kooky mother who she's a bit like Dr. Dolittle. She'll go stand in the middle of a field and wild animals will just gravitate towards her.
Oh, wow.
So she has this absolute affinity to nature, and that has also informed my view of the world. And so I think moving from somewhere like South Africa to Hong Kong was really, I didn't move from those two geographies, but spending time in those two geographies, I kind of felt like I was seeing both sides of an equation, whereby in South Africa, you have rhinos and elephants, and in Shenyang, you've got tusks and you've got ivory shelves. And so you're kind of like, you've gone from one end of the chain to the other. And you kind of also get a bigger understanding of why these things happen and how they happen. If you're in South Africa and you think about these markets where people are trading ivory, but that's kind of absurd. It's an elephant tooth, and what's the value? And then you live in Asia, and then you're like, okay, I understand how, I don't agree with it, but that's not the point. I understand the mentality that creates these worlds. So yeah, I think being exposed to nature from a young age, having that nurtured by a mother, and then coming to this part of the world where there's just a bit of a different dynamic with natural landscapes and wildlife, particularly in Hong Kong, where many people don't have space for animals. They're expensive. They don't have time to look after a lot of pets. And so there's just a very different dynamic, and animals are maybe seen as something that sometimes you wear, or it's more of a garment than somebody you share a planet with. And anyway, so just even looking at like children with dogs, children are usually fearful of dogs. And so there's just, to me, so many missed opportunities because dogs are amazing. But anyway, so long story short, I think it's by design, by nature, by nurture, and then just by the fortune of having to see so many different geographies and understand so many different drivers to people's mindsets and beliefs and money, of course, money.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I had a conversation with somebody who's from South Africa. So being from Canada, large open spaces, the sort of the crazy pendulum of the weather out there, going, for example, if going at it from British Columbia, where everything's just huge, and just thinking about like the place of forests and the water and everything. Okay, so there's that, and how that shapes your mind. And then coming from South Africa, which is a more, so like it's also like how all of that shapes the mentality in space. And yet, when you consider Hong Kong, which actually has unbelievable biodiversity, I think Hong Kong has like 250 or 300 species of butterflies, and for just Hong Kong. And that's the same number for all of Canada,
Wow.
So like the density here is just really astounding.
Mm-hmm.
You go outside, you see 50 different species of snakes, you have all the insects. And it's true that Hong Kong, like for somebody who has lots of dogs and cats, it's true that when we go hiking, most people are fearful. So how does the concept of fear sit in? Because you seem to have a real comfort or understanding of the psychology, people's sort of psychology. You used words that seems to suggest that you have an attentiveness to that. So where does fear fit in?
I think fear is self-created, it's real, it's physical, it's messaged, it's communicated, it serves certain people's purposes. So it comes at us from multiple angles. And I think, for example, if you are someone who's never grown up with animals, you never had a pet, and you see a dog walking down the street towards you, I would get that you'd be fearful. I get it. And that's weird to me that I get that, because I like to think I'm the opposite. But then I spent so many years not having pets that I kind of stepped out of that equation. And now I've got 2 rescue dogs. So now I'm in a different equation, and I'm kind of back into, why are you scared of my dog kind of mentality. But there's another layer now that I live in a Muslim country. So people have all kinds of reactions to my dogs. So then there's like even more layers added onto it. But I think the long and the short of it is that some people have had genuinely traumatic experiences. They've been bitten by a dog once, and that might have been by accident, or just, the dog was playing. And so the way we perceive what happens to us, the way we perceive what could happen to us, and the way that we perceive the world all exist in very different planes. But I actually, I don't know why, but I kind of have empathy for every angle. I get a bit frustrated when people are scared of dogs, because it's like, come on, these are like amazing species, and it's our loss that we don't understand and interact with them, because they actually do way more for us than we could do for them. Not that that's important, but if you really want to spin it on that angle, you're missing out on so much.
Sure.
However, at the same time, I have, if we don't habituate people, we don't make things easier, more inviting, be that through language, be that through messaging, film, videos, photos. We're getting all this messaging all the time. And if a certain geography wants to tell you that dogs are dangerous and nasty and will bite your hand off, or they're just evil, it's going to sink in. So I don't blame people. I just wish that we would focus on the right things, and everybody benefit from that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, as you're saying this, I've got this photo of these 2 people beautifully looking at me on the screen. Should we move on to the next photo?
Yeah, I have no idea what you're looking up.
Well, I'm looking at the photo of you, and is that your husband, or is that who's like in the photo in what looks like mid-levels, where you're wearing the white dress, the black, and then the man is Silva. Is that your husband, or?
I don't know.
You're a very striking image.
I forget the photo. I'm so sorry. It's been a while since I sent these, and I have no idea what I ended up sending you. So I'm reliving this experience with you as you're describing. I'm like, oh, that sounds like
amazing. Well, it's a great photo. It's a great portrait, and since we're both confused, let's move on to the next photo. Nice. Okay, so here there's a photo of you're in a large space, hooked way above, like the ceilings are really tall. Hooked high are 4 dresses / jalabas. My heritage is Moroccan, so it could be kind of more traditional dress. They're long robes. Nice, beautiful colors. So one's not quite crimson, but it's this like reddish tone. One is this emerald one is yellow, and one is more kind of like a pattern. And you're kind of peeking through. Does this
yeah, I'm with you.
This photo? Okay.
I'm with you. This time we got it.
Looking at the photographer. You're very elegantly dressed. I can't guess what you're trying to communicate with this photo. It's an interior shot. There's only one plant. There's no other furniture except for these 4 dresses or robes kind of hooked up on the ceiling. Yeah. So what's this photo?
So that was taken in this apartment, and it was taken
Oh,
quite
wow.
recently because I'm off to Milan in June for a big event. It's like a trade fair for industrial machinery in the fashion industry.
Oh, wow.
It's called ITMA, and it happens every 4 years. And the reason I'm going is because within all the sustainability hoo-ha, I kind of gravitated more and more towards fashion, not because I'm a big fashion fan or a fashionable person, simply because I found that when you're talking to people, there seem to be two gateway drugs when it comes to sustainability. That's food and fashion, because everybody does it and everybody has to do it. So if you're talking about food or if you're talking about fashion, you've got people's attention and you've got their buy-in because they're directly engaged. So I ended up going with the fashion route simply because that's how the cards landed. But in the meantime, since I left Hong Kong and moved to Malaysia, I spent a lot of time in Singapore, and my partner, not Alex, another partner from Hong Kong, moved to Singapore, and together we started working again on consulting for fashion brands and in the fashion industry, and kind of curating creative solutions to the problems that they face, whatever those problems should be. We kind of make it happen. And then in the meantime, we were joined by another partner. So now we're three, and we've got a sustainable fashion startup. And part of what we're doing is still very early development, so there's not a lot being said about it. But we're going to Milan in June. And this image was created to kind of put along across social media platforms, simply just to say, I'm going to Milan to ITMA for this event, very excited. Because that's what I do. I just wear weird things and I hang things up, and our apartment looks more like an art installation than anything else. And my husband's okay with it. He's kind of given up. When we were living in Hong Kong, we had this small apartment, and I was working on a project where I would collect cellophane and roll it, a bit like a dung beetle. I was trying to see how much I could collect and how much I could roll. Turns out I can roll quite a lot, but it also took up a lot of our apartment. And I did say to him, look, if this is too much, please do let me go. No. And he's just like, it's fine. Enjoy it. I'm like, great. So here I've got a lot more space. Lucky for him. So I just hang things and I play around with things. Wearing secondhand fashion is very important to me. It's something I started doing in 2017, just as a little dare. What would happen if I didn't buy new clothing for a year? And I put it online, and people were, as people are, very opinionated. Wow, that's not a big deal, said some. Oh my gosh, are you going to be okay, said others. What are you going to do for underwear was also a question. So before I knew it, I realized that I'd kind of inadvertently struck a chord with people in either direction. Long story short on that one, it's been 6 years that I haven't bought any new clothes. So
nice.
I think for me, when I wear clothes, I don't see it as a fashion statement. I see it as a conversation starter, because people might compliment you and like, oh, I like your trousers. And within 2 minutes, that conversation turns into something way more interesting than trousers. It's just an invitation to open another conversation. So hanging clothes up in my apartment, making weird photos, or just, I don't know, odd photos is something I do as self-entertainment, communication, and opening channels to meet other people and to just to catch their attention sometimes.
Yeah, like now. With this podcast. Okay, so does your fashion startup have a name?
It does. It's called The Future Kind.
The Future Kind. Oh, what a beautiful name. Nice. It's very nice.
Thank you.
It's very nice. Okay, so
you can ask me questions. I'll answer as best I can.
But this is how it works. We're just talking. So I'm just trying to think, like, the thing with fashion, there's the whole issue of supply chain and everything. So coming from Montreal, where I came from originally, Montreal is I just think North America, certainly Canada, there's way more of this history or just presence of thrift shops, of secondhand stores. And in Hong Kong, that's, it's changing, it's increasing. But even though it's like secondhand clothing, it's all premium stuff that's super expensive. And it's like, like it's not like the thrift shop experience like you would get in North America. Or how do you understand the economics, I guess, of secondhand clothes and its impact?
That's a good question, and I think it's
Whew,
getting a lot
finally.
of. I underscore that they were all good questions, but I think that it's a topic that's getting a lot of attention lately
Hmm.
for a whole bunch of reasons. There's, again, as with everything, multiple layers, right? So secondhand fashion has elements of economic disposability. It has
Hmm.
elements of inclusivity, ability to actually get the products, people putting products online and putting way big markups on it and people getting upset about that.
Sure.
It's, as with everything in this planet nowadays, it's ripe for controversy and non-controversial elements. So my take is this, that if I wanted to, I would like to be a sustainable fashion consumer, or buyer rather. I do not like the word consumer, participant, but I
Hmm.
don't have the interest or bandwidth or energy to read all the labels and keep up to date with who's producing what this textile is. Can I recycle it here? What is the chemical dyes being used? What's the labor condition? What's the factory doing? Who's being
Right.
cancelled? Who's greenwashing? I can't be asked. So for me, I feel it's just easier, or it's more enjoyable. Actually, for the first year, I wasn't going to buy anything at all. The deal wasn't,
Hmm.
I'm going to just secondhand shop for the first year. It was, I am just not going to buy anything. And that did happen for the first year. I didn't buy anything. And unsurprisingly, I had a lot of clothes that I could just wear,
Hmm.
as most of us do. And somebody actually commented, they say, but you have enough clothes as it is. And it's absolutely true. However, the question is, we don't buy clothes because we need them. We buy clothes for a whole bunch of other reasons.
Yep.
And I'm
Yep.
talking about certain, I'm not talking, this is not a generalization. I'm talking about specific groups of people or majorities of people. But this to say that Hong Kong is an interesting space because, again, you've got this psychological or this cultural propensity to believe that things are dirty or they're unclean.
Hmm.
And hello, coronavirus, that just ramped up all the whatever. But also, there's the cultural things, for example, shoes, people believing that you're stepping into the shoes of deceased people, therefore carrying their energy with them. I mean, it's endless, the number of reasons why
Right.
people align one direction or another. For me, after the first year of not buying anything, I started to understand a little bit more about the joy that fashion brings or clothing brings, right? And there is joy in
Hmm.
it. Of course there is. That's why we do it. So I started thinking I started understanding why I wanted to buy. And that informed me in a really helpful way because it wasn't just this knee jerk reaction. It wasn't just the conditioning. It was more nuanced. But that
Hmm.
led me to say, okay, well, let me try and see what's around in Hong Kong. And it turns out that in Hong Kong, there are fantastic secondhand shops, to my mind, such as the Salvation Army, which is a personal
Hmm.
favorite. And then you've got organizations like Green Ladies who really hit the marker when it comes to price point, style, curation of products, customer experience. They do a brilliant job of the shop layout. And then you get your more premium luxury fashion brands or secondhand concierge, which can only really exist in a city like Hong Kong because
Sure.
you've got that clientele and you've got
Well, you have the
that
suppliers as well, right? Like
exactly.
we're going
So
to.
you're not going to find that even in Singapore. It's limited.
Hmm.
So this to say that I am a fan of it because to me, secondhand fashion slows me down by default. I don't walk into a space and go, okay, pink dress, here I come. The clothes choose me. It's the Cinderella moment where does it fit?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So I will spend hours and days and maybe come out with one piece. And that to me is this
Hmm.
natural, I enjoy the hunt. I enjoy seeking things out. It's part of my travel itinerary. When I go to new cities, my first thing to do is where are the charity shops, where are the vegan breakfast spots? And that's where I start my experience, which takes me down some very dodgy roads very often. And I don't necessarily recommend it to everyone because, man, it gets very dark very fast. But that said, I do enjoy it.
So why Penang?
Oh, my husband, I'm putting that one straight on him. That is, he got a job offer here and we said, okay, why not? It was
Yeah.
time to leave Hong Kong. So
So how long have you lived out there now?
1 year,
Okay. Okay. So and how long did you live in Hong Kong?
about on and off about 9 years.
Okay. So we get shaped by our environment and we get shaped by either the culture or the geography, the landscape, all the very obvious stuff, and then the not so obvious stuff. So now you're living in this place that is, I mean, the pendulum doesn't just go left and right. It goes in many, many different dimensions and directions. And so now the pendulum that you're in is in one direction that is quite different, that most people listening to this could anchor, could understand, right? You've come from South Africa. Yeah, you have this worldly exposure. And so what happened to you in terms of going there, in terms of how that influenced the what's it called? The
future kind.
Future kind, yeah. So how has that shaped your thinking?
The geography or the future kind? Both.
My questions make no sense, but you just have to answer the one you think that I asked.
Let me do that. It's funny that because when I was in Hong Kong, I was part of a group called the Circular Community Hong Kong, and it was just this very organic group that grew out of people wanting to talk about sustainable fashion, which quickly turned into everything else because every industry needs this conversation. Within that group, it kind of sprouted out in different geographies. There's one in Singapore. And that one in Singapore had an interesting name in it. This woman had a Dutch-sounding surname, but then there was an Indian surname. And I was curious, and I just sent her a message on LinkedIn, and I connected with her, and I said, by the way, I spend a lot of time in Singapore, and I'd love to meet up for a coffee next time I'm there. So I landed in Singapore in March last year and met up with my partner, Christina, and we went to meet this third person, Nicole. And just an informal chat, within 2 hours, we're like, right, we're going to start something. And within 1 week, we're having meetings and stuff. So it was a very organic drive to just, we see these problems in the industry. We're not coming at it from a big brand angle. We're actually coming quite under the radar, and we're going to try and hit the mark that we see as the most overlooked and the least sexy. So we're really kind of, we're moving slowly and quietly, but I hope that our impact is meaningful, because that's why we do this. We're all spending time out of our other jobs and things to do this. And it's been a year of commitment, and it's quite exciting because we come from very different directions. Nicole's more science, Christina's more education. She's a professor at SCAD. And then I'm coming more from the media journalism. And together we're just looking at this from a very big angle, going, hey, here's the problem, how are we going to solve it? So it's really kind of, like rolling up our sleeves and just getting on with it. And it's been a real joy because, again, everybody's got stuff going on, but we're just so committed to this that we just keep on. And we've agreed this is a marathon. We're not just going to come up with this, sexy Instagram page and jazz hands and like, hey, here we are. We're actually really trying to build something that will run, even if we leave it or hand it over or whatever. We just want to build it. So,
well, I love it, and just want to build it and let it run. And let's go on to the next photo. Totally not what I was expecting. I don't even know what I was expecting. Okay, so I can't even place the landscape because, so you're standing, the three women wearing black dresses, standing on the banks of a river, or not a lake. It looks like a river. So it's on grass. You're standing on grass, and there is a kind of I wouldn't call it an acacia, but there's a kind of tree, kind of creeping overhead. The woman on the right is her hands on the trunk. And then there's another one. The three of you are looking to the left. The photos, you're in shade, so your eyes aren't like blasted by the sunlight. You're looking away to the left. Who knows what you're contemplating? Yeah, what's this photo?
We're contemplating the future kind.
Oh, nice.
That's the Christina and Nicole.
Okay.
Just talking about. So this was a photo shoot in Singapore that we did maybe a couple of months ago, just to
in Singapore.
Have some. Correct.
And yet you're not all like dripping sweat because it's so hot and humid out there.
Well, we timed these things. It was an early wake up.
Okay. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
The photographer knew what she was doing.
Okay.
So yeah, that was kind of, there's the other side of that shoot was my idea of us we're wearing like these Ghostbusters jumpsuits.
Okay.
One's red, one's yellow, one's blue. And it's kind of just this more unexpected approach to what we're doing. So this one, I think, is a little bit more Handmaiden's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit more LinkedIn friendly.
Sure.
Whereas the other ones are a little bit more playful. But the essence is this, we are three very different people doing the hard work to just do something beyond surface appreciation and stuff.
Okay.
So really kind of working in the bowels of the industry.
Well,
because it's a dirty industry. It's a very dirty industry.
So would you say, would you say that all industries, all human endeavor has its underside that's kind of grungy and gross, and other side which is uplifting and nice, and maybe fashion is just very consistent? I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, what aspect of what you're trying to do is disruptive?
The way we're doing it, or why we're doing it?
Sure, yes. Both.
I think most people nowadays understand that the industry is very polluting and harmful to people and planet. I think people get that.
Okay.
There's no big showstopper there. I think it's just when you understand a little bit more of the industry, and also how people in the industry operate, right? Who's butting up with who, and who's gatekeeping, who's doing what with what.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's an opportunity there to, don't like using this word, but to disrupt, because it feels like everything's up for the taking right now. We're disrupting so many industries, like so many things are being, why not this? Why can't we kind of break through to the next level with this? And that's kind of just to accelerate things. We're not going out there to, all guns blazing. Not at all. That's not the way ahead. The way ahead is just to crack open certain nuts
mm-hmm.
and let people feast on the seeds. Or the nuts themselves, rather. So yeah, I think a lot of people are pushing in the same direction, and we just want to push in that direction, but kind of way more accelerated and
So are you looking at things like, so my nerdy side knows a little bit about supply chain management and about, how these things go from start to finish. And then, like you're kind of, where do you help the situation kind of improve, right? So in terms of
kind of towards the beginning,
okay,
like upstream.
Okay. So talk about that. What do you mean?
Well, I think within the industry, people are very quick to point fingers at the brands that they know, such as, I don't know, all the big ones, right? H&M, Zara, the usual suspects. Mm-hmm. And what we forget is that actually the industry is made up of a lot of different size businesses, a lot of mom and pop shops, especially in this part of the world.
Yeah.
And just because they don't necessarily have access to the sustainability teams, or language barriers, or just don't have the overhead to join in these big initiatives or these innovations, there's a huge opportunity, or sometimes it feels like they're overlooked. Mm-hmm. And with a lot of legislation coming in from Europe and the US around product passports and traceability, and where does, people frequently focus on Europe and the US, but where does that leave Asia?
Sure.
Like, how did they fit into all of that? And so I think we're kind of looking partly at it from a geographic perspective, because we're here.
Yeah.
And we see that frequently it's not part of the conversation, and it's not part of the thinking. And that feels like a missed opportunity. So
take me to school for a second. So when I went to Sri Lanka, one of the things that I saw was, first of all, there's let's say these plantation things where they're growing rubber, and other places where they're creating fabric and then making, nice shirts and whatever. And so I could see very kind of directly very small operations, as you say, like family-run operations of maybe 50 villagers or something. Everybody's contributing to making this stuff. So take us to school in the sense of, what does somebody who hasn't been to Asia, like, what have you seen that makes it more real for them? In terms of, well, you might think that this is a big old factory, but actually it's just it's a small, humble little operation. So have you seen that? Or like,
Yeah, I lived in Cambodia for a long time,
Oh, wow.
and Cambodia is a big garment hub. Also, I think I don't know how much people understand about this, but how much of different factories make different parts of the same product.
Right.
And therefore, with that comes all this overspill and challenge around accountability. And everybody's a bit hands off when something goes wrong somewhere along the line because that's not in my wheelhouse, or
Right.
that's not in my
Or
space.
not
So,
my fault or whatever.
or not my fault. Or so that the system has kind of become this very dispersed, lots of different spaces doing lots of different things to make one product, and that with it brings. I mean, maybe I think that the places you're describing are a little bit more of an ecosystem whereby they are not part of a huge machine, because if they're doing that kind of number of people and at that pace, then probably not contributing to the big
Okay.
volumes that we see flying around the world. But there is obviously we do see a lot of well, not a lot. There is regenerative farming, and there are pockets, as there are around the whole world, of people doing really meaningful, helpful types of production that benefit everyone. Right, topsoil and soil health is everyone's opportunity. But I think they're rare, and in the grander scheme of things, the way we're accelerating with ultra fast fashion, the way we're just sending things around the world, those people are a little bit of outliers. They can definitely, unfortunately, but they can definitely inform when it comes to heritage and craftsmanship, or even just, it's like slow fashion, slow food.
Okay.
These are extremely valuable parts of every chain, but they're not the majority, right? So they're not probably where you and I are getting our food or our clothing, for that matter.
So how do we, like somebody who's listening to this who kind of says, wow, Tanja sounds really switched on. How do they either imitate, highest form of flattery, imitate what you're doing, or learn or reach out or get involved, or, like, how do we expand that circle so that more people kind of come under your orbit and either understand what you're doing or contribute or help or whatever?
Well, I think first things I would always tell people is, find your sweet spot in this, because it's a marathon. And, frequently we see somebody doing something that sounds good, and maybe it is good in that context, or maybe it's just exciting or different. But I think finding something that you care about, that resonates with you, and that fits into your life is more important than that. So I think it does take some self-reflecting, and it does take that whole idea of, again, going back to who you are and what lights you up and what connects you to everything around you, because there's always an entry point into the sustainable conversation.
Okay.
Or the sustainable movement. And if you're coming at it from production leadership, thought leadership, managing teams have to be sustainable in terms of their emotional, mental resilience and the capacity to continue producing their work, their thoughts, their ideas. So I think sustainability or environmentalism, it's a much broader thing that doesn't necessarily only apply to physical material production. I think it's a mindset around how we engage with things, full stop, respecting sentient beings, and it kind of trickles on from there. Once you start opening those portals, you start making those connections for yourself. You don't need somebody to stand there and tell you, today do this, or this list of this, or this is how I start my day. Everybody's inundated with information. I think one kind of needs to find their own space, and honestly, there's space for everyone, because the more niche you are, the weirder you are. Actually, it's the better, because you'll find that there are like 1,000 other people who feel exactly the same way. Right. And then you start creating these communities or these movements. But part of what we're going to do at the Future Kind is, we are climate tech, but we're also going to start creating a human arm of what we do. And that is going to be around events, education, white papers, research, and community building. So something more public facing.
Cool. Amazing.
Because we see a lot of just great ideas, and we'd like to take that further. And on a more personal level, I'm going to start going into psychology, because I feel that when I go to these events and people are talking about sustainable fashion and they're talking about the industry, we have to make more, we have to make less, we have to make it this way, we have to make it that way. And then people are talking about the consumers, which is the worst way, or the users, or the buyers, or the shoppers, or the whatever you want to call it. But they're always somehow categorized as in, we need to educate the consumer, or we need to give the consumer better products. But what about a different way? What about if the consumer simply doesn't consume. I mean, I think that we overlook this whole human aspect of that we're frequently just manipulated into buying all these things that we don't need or want. And we don't even know it's happening because it's happened from day zero and everything around us has primed us. And the psychology around that I find fascinating, because we can innovate textiles and materials and everything until we're blue in the face, but unless we address why people are shopping so ferociously, and nobody really has that conversation. And when I bring it up, people are kind of taken aback, like, why are you bringing brains and psychology and emotions into this? Because that's where the power is. And we keep on giving it away to other people, and we pay them to take it from us. So that kind of going back to that rebellious streak of what gets you fired up, that gets me fired up, because not only are people ruining ecosystems, but we're paying them to do it. And anyway, so as you can tell, I get very passionate about this, but I think, to me, I see this opportunity to come in from a psychological perspective and to actually ask people a little bit more about what is it that you're trying to fill? What's the gap? And how's that working for you? Because it's not.
Yeah. So I'm going to end with one last question. When is your PhD thesis or popular book coming out?
Yes.
You should see your face.
No, it's because it's funny. Just the last week, Christina and I said that we're going to write a book. So
nice.
It's a timely question. However long it takes to write a book, and if anybody has any tips on publishing, or please send them our way, because it's a couple of years ago I was going to write a book on eco-anxiety, and I ended up not writing it. I'm glad I didn't, because I think I peaked too soon in that conversation. Nowadays you can see BBC videos on eco-anxiety stuff, which is fantastic. So I think people are now a little bit more closer to it. But Christine and I do want to write a book. So
nice. I can happily connect you to lots of people from the podcast and outside of the podcast on book writing. Tanja Wessels. That's it. It's been an hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me and for making the time and for the great questions.
No, great. I asked a great question. Woo! That's
no, I said questions. There were multiple questions.
This is great. And you go to Milan and take them by storm. I love it.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.